Montreal Canadiens look to bounce back in the second half, and we have Laura Saba of Locked On Canadiens to talk about their future.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back. Hey, Laura, how are you? Welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are free and available on all platforms, and it's great to welcome back Laura Saba of Locked On Canadiens. Laura, how are you doing? How was All-Star Game weekend for you?
It was fun. It was interesting. We on our show we've got a couple of ideas for improvement for the All-Star Game, but we thought it was interesting, and we liked that there were new events that they added in for Vegas specific events. We really liked that city hometown aspect of it, and I hope we see more of that in the future.
I agree. I think they did a nice job sort of specializing it to that fountain thing was great. I mean, that was unique to say the least.
Exactly.
Yeah, I definitely liked it. And I sort of like this format, because you can't pretend that it's a regular game. No one's going to check anyway. So doing it the 3-on-3, I think at least provides some entertainment value.
Absolutely. It makes it more fun. And it is for new fans. It is to attract new fans. It's also for kids to see their favorite players. But I think you can kind of keep the regular fan like you and me. You can kind of keep our interest too if you keep doing exciting things with it.
Absolutely agreed. So the Canadiens, I mean, not obviously the start they wanted to the season. 23 points through 44 games, only 8 wins. What at this point gives you optimism that the second half of the year will be better than the first?
So I think with new management in place, it's going to take some time. It's definitely going to take some time. The last time we spoke, I think it was when Jeff Gorton was hired. And since then, obviously, the Canadiens have found their general manager in Kent Hughes, which is a little bit outside of the box. It's not way outside of the box. He's still a hockey guy, but he's a hockey agent, and he's represented players, and they all have great things to say about him. So I do think that, from everything that he's saying, he said that he wanted to take his time, assess the situation. It's not necessarily a tear everything down kind of rebuild. He does want to rebuild the team. He does want to restore the Canadiens to, respectability, to not possibly not their glory days. You might not see that in a 32 team league, but a perennial contender is always the goal, right? For any rebuild. So one of the aspects of his initial sort of getting to know the team was going to be conversations with the coach over the course of this break. The Canadiens had no games last week, so they were off between Sunday and this coming Tuesday, so tomorrow. So there was plenty of time, and he wanted to talk to the coach specifically. This is what he told the media. Like, he's been pretty transparent about this kind of stuff. He's going to talk about sort of developing the players that are currently in the system. And he said something really interesting in his introductory press conference, was that development is not always just about a prospect. It's not about somebody prior to getting to drafting, to be drafted by the OHL or NHL or whatever. Development happens in many forms, and it can be ongoing throughout a player's career. And I thought that was really interesting. And the fact that he said that, it seemed from the conversation that he was going to demand from the coach to get some sort of direction strategy, which is something that's been lacking. You and I have spoken about this twice already. There's no strategy on this coaching staff. There's no team. There's no direction. There's no system. Everybody plays like they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know where they're supposed to be. So I think the pointed words that Kent Hughes has used in his open discussions with the media, whether it's in a press conference or whether it's a TV interview, or, the Athletic got to sit down with him, everybody, they like Pierre LeBrun, Arpon Basu, Marc-Antoine Gaudin, all the people who cover the NHL in Montreal as closely as they do got the chance to speak to Kent Hughes, and he has not at all. He's not committed to keeping this coach past the season. In fact, some of these subtle words that he's saying is finding the right coach, things like that. So I think that's going to be the crux of it, because the trade deadline is a little over a month away. It's about a month and a half away. We're expecting some players to be shipped out. I know the Canadiens are getting calls on Ben Sherratt. They're getting calls on Brett Kulak. They're getting calls on potentially, we don't know, Mike Hoffman might be an option for a team that's looking for pure goal scoring, because he's a kind of player where he's not going to be useful in a rebuild, right? If you can get good value for him, he might be gone. But if you can't, you keep him, right? Like, he scores enough goals that it really has to be about the return. But you're also talking about who's untouchable. He's spoken to some of his veterans. He's had chats with their future and what they want to do. Josh Anderson specifically has said he wants to stay. So he's kind of balancing that out. Jeff Petrie might be gone if there's a good return. But if there isn't something worth the return, then, you know, we're still going to see him in a Canadiens uniform. But the point is, 6 weeks from now, this team could be completely different. But the one thing that does give me optimism is that this general manager is demanding better from the coaching staff and is demanding specific things from the coaching staff. And it's entirely possible. They said that they weren't going to fire the coaches before the end of the season. It's entirely possible. It's just a theory that's been floating around. We've said it on our podcast. It's just a guess. It's a guess. It's not really anything that we've heard. But a couple of people that are also dialed in said that this might be an option for them, is to bring in a consultant. So you're not firing the current coaching staff, and you're not bringing in somebody and saying, okay, this is your new boss now. But you're bringing in a consultant and strongly encouraging your coaching staff to listen to this other person, whether it's a video coach, whatever they name him. I think that's a possibility, but, you know, he's got so much stuff to do right now that I think just that conversation with Dominique Ducharme, or the many conversations, I don't know how many have gone on, I do expect there to be some improvement in the second half of the season.
You talked a little bit about who might be shipped out. What do you think that they are looking to bring in at this point?
I think they want prospects. I think they want draft picks. This is a season that they do not expect to go this badly, but once they're in a position where they are well within reach of that number 1 overall pick, and you know that this draft is pretty deep with talent, and you know the coming draft is pretty deep with talent, these 2 years are your opportunity. So if you're going to go all in on a rebuild, well, not all in. If you're going to commit to a rebuild without doing a full teardown, which is what, you know, he keeps saying he doesn't want to go to the Arizona Coyotes route. He wants to rebuild without, you know, completely gutting everything. Then you want to collect players that are young, that are either on entry-level deals, or the teams still have rights to them, that have some promise that you can kind of develop into your Canadiens mold and your Canadian system, whatever you decide that is. And you're looking for picks. Like, I think, you know, picks are, especially for any team that's bad, you know that picks are a hot commodity because you can trade. You can trade up in the draft with them. You can trade later on during the season if you see that there's somebody that you really have your eye on that could join your long-term plan. And I think for me, he also needs to clear cap space because the Canadiens are right up against the cap. And if you're going to try and instill a new kind of mentality, a new kind of system, a new kind of philosophy on the team, not only do you want to like give yourself a little bit of cap room to play with, because you might want to bring in certain veterans, you might want to bring in certain young players. You know, there's definitely players that I'm sure they have their eye on that are probably, you know, early on in this league, maybe there's not really a fit for them on a team that's a contender already, or is full of you know, players. They have a good stockpile of prospects. You want to bring in players that could be promising. So I think that that's essentially what he's going to look for. I don't think that he's looking for any rentals, obviously. He might be willing to take some on that are coming off the cap in the offseason in order to ship out some players. But I think long-term, they need to fill up, make some room up under the cap, because right now they're right up against it. And, you know, Marc Bergevin left them with some contracts that are a little bit longer than you would like.
Last question before we head out. The goaltending situation. Do we see Carey Price? What is the latest with that? And who plays the rest of the season?
So with Carey Price, he said he talked to the media about a week ago. And he said that the next few weeks are going to be pivotal in his recovery because he's had a couple of setbacks. After his surgery, he was able to come back and skate. And then there was a setback, and then he came back to skate, and then he had COVID, or, you know, like a lot of the players had COVID, they locked them all out, and he himself confirmed that he had it. So all of that progress that he had made was all fallen back. And so he said that the next few weeks will be pivotal to see whether he plays this season or not. He said he has every intention of continuing to be the Montreal Canadiens goaltender, so he doesn't want to leave this market. But I don't necessarily think that we'll see him unless the next few weeks go really well in his rehab and his skating and everything like that. And right up against the trade deadline, we've got Jake Allen, who's been out so far. He was going to be out for a total of 8 weeks. And I guess the slated timeline was around the trade deadline. So we are going to see him again. But in the meantime, right now, The Canadiens are going with Caden Primo and Samuel Montembeault. They've got Michael McNiven. I don't know if there's any value in them trying to sign or claim a goalie off waivers, unless it's somebody who's got an expiring contract this year, just to have, to fill that butt in the seat, so to speak, because it's really not worth it if you don't know what your team and your system are going to look like in the offseason. What if Carey Price can't ever play again? I mean, that's unlikely based on what he's saying, but you might have to drastically change your whole goaltending philosophy from scratch. So I think that, chances are we're going to see Samuel Montembeault and Caden Primo trade off the starting spot. And when Jake Allen comes back, they're going to send Caden Primo down, because I believe he doesn't have to go through waivers to be sent back down.
Right. All right, Laura, why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers where they could find your podcast and where they can find you on social media?
So we are at Locked On Canadiens, available wherever you get this podcast, any podcasting platform. We're also on YouTube now, so you can find us on there. Just search Locked On Canadiens. Our Twitter account is LO_Canadiens. You can find my co-host at Scott Metla, and you'll find me at The Active Stick.
All right. Laura, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.